let's talk about your three intellects. Pause. We briefly mentioned it in the interviews, but I wanted to ask you, who do you think are some of the past visionaries of earlier days, and why?
Um, uh, in
Because there's
poetry,
I there's a short list.
Walt Whitman is a visionary. I think I've said before, people would lump Emily Dickinson in with him, but she's almost an anti-visionary. Someone who's visionary in the arts is going to basically be able to say a Whitmanian view of life, a Whitmanian this or that. Dickinson doesn't really have that because a visionary sort of transforms by the way they allow people to experience things. Dickinson brings things down. So, in a sense, you could say she's a visionary and that she's an anti-visionary, but she's almost antithetical to the idea of what a visionary is. And she's not as great a poet as a lot of people make out. She's one of those poets that uh, she reminds me of the movie Vertigo. When Vertigo first came out, people famously say, "Oh, it got mediocre reviews." But I've looked at some of those reviews, and they actually nail a lot of what's wrong with Vertigo as a film. It's not a bad film. It's a good, solid film at best. It's a popcorn movie. There isn't anything really greatly deep there. There's nothing in Vertigo, for example, that touches the 10 best movies of a Bergman or the best
Yeah.
movies of a Cassavetes or a Fellini even. Um, and in that way, Dickinson is a lot of the things that people said about her when her poems first were published, even though they were Baudelarized, still hold true. There's there's a there's a circular kind of rhythm, a circular kind of way she views things that becomes predictable after you've read 10 or 12 poems of hers. She's got 1,800 little poems, whatever it is. By the time anyone, even an average reader reads 30 or 40 poems of Dickinson, you pretty much know ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. It's like watching a Catskill comic, Borscht Belt, Jewish comedy, vaudeville, in that you know what's going to happen, but you laugh at it anyway. You know what Dickinson is going to do in a poem, but you accept it anyway because it's Dickinson, and that's the small little world she's circumscribed for herself. When it comes to novels, I would certainly put someone like Twain up there. He has a visionary sense, although he again probably doesn't have as much great stuff as is ascribed to him. Uh, a lot of his lesser stuff is Twain describes something, some incident, some people, kind of wacky. He does it in a funny way. There's a little twist of fate, perhaps, and then, well, I'm Mark Twain being Mark Twain, and so there is a certain formula to some of his lesser works, but he has enough of his great stuff that that and that great stuff, whether it's Life on the Mississippi or Pudd'nhead Wilson, is probably his most underrated work. That's a work that's only just a notch or two below Huckleberry Finn, if you want to even say that. It's not as broad and comic, and so it doesn't get its due. Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court has moments. It's not a great work itself, but it has certainly some great moments. And I'm missing a few other things off the top of my head, but I would certainly put him in that sense as a visionary.
Superb essayist too.
Yeah, yeah, essayist. I haven't really read much. I've only read some portions of James Baldwin, and his fiction. Jessica's read a few books of his fiction. I've read all of his essays, though. He's more visionary in his essays, I think, than from what I've read in his fiction. Lauren Isley, certainly, as much he has a visionary outlook in his essays, not in his poetry. Um, Trying to think. O'Neill certainly transforms, and there's an O'Neill kind of view of the universe. Sylvia Plath as a poet, Hart Crane, Wallace Stevens, Robinson Jeffers. The poets, in a sense, to me, are the most easy to define as visionary or not. Novelists, Betty Smith, is that book a visionary book? No, I wouldn't say that, but it's as great as any visionary work that I know. Um, well, that's been published and put out
Perhaps.
for public
What about
consumption.
Herman
Filmmakers.
Melville?
Yeah, Melville. Melville with Moby Dick. Melville in Bartleby. Melville in uh, Billy Budd, Benito Cereno. I'd even include Typee and Omu, which are sort of skeletal versions of Moby Dick in a sense. Um, uh, so yeah, he would be up there. I'm trying to think of any other 19th century English language writers. I uh, I have a difficult time thinking of novelists. Dostoevsky. I don't know if I would consider Dostoevsky a visionary because Dostoevsky didn't have that grand view. Dostoevsky, in a sense, was one of these sort of political writers that everything was to serve a political purpose, despite his claims people make of his Christianity and other things. He was very much more. I don't really think of him in a Dostoevskian universe. Same thing with Tolstoy. Tolstoy even more so than Dostoevsky. I've only read Turgenev's Fathers and Sons. I don't remember it. It's 25, 30 years since I read that, enough to comment on it fully. Um, Other than that, I would put it as an excellent to near great novel, although you could probably make some claims for its greatness.